It wasn't the sound of his voice that shattered me. I had heard rejection before. I had heard it when I was 18, standing in the rain while a boy from the neighboring pack told me I wasn't pretty enough. I had heard it at 25, when a warrior told me he needed a mate with a wolf, not a broken human defect. I had heard it 11 times from 11 different men, over 5 decades. No, it wasn't the sound, it was the boredom in his eyes. Alpha Draxon sat on his velvet chair, picking at a loose thread on his cuff, looking at me as if I were a piece of furniture that had outstayed its welcome. The great hall of the Silver Creek pack was silent, save for the shuffling of 300 wolves watching their alpha dispose of his trash. I, Alpha Draxon Hollows, reject you, Estara Nightveil, he said, finally looking up. His eyes were devoid of emotion. No pity, no anger, just mild annoyance. Let's be honest, Estara. Look at you. No wolf wants a mate closer to the grave than the birthing bed. The bond didn't snap. A snap implies something quick, sharp, and clean. This was a withering. It felt like a vine that had been wrapped around my heart for days, suddenly turned to ash and crumbled, leaving a hollow, aching cavity in my chest. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I was 50 years old. I had learned a long time ago that tears do not move men like Draxon. They only amuse them. You are dry wood, Estara, Draxon continued, his voice carrying to the back of the room where the young she-wolf stood whispering. And I need a fire. I need a Luna who can give me strong sons, not a grandmother to knit them socks. Laughter rippled through the room. It started with the teenagers, the ones with smooth skin and bright eyes, and spread to the elders who should have known better. The sound was a physical thing, scraping against my skin. I sank to my knees, not out of submission, but because my legs simply refused to hold the weight of my humiliation any longer. I pressed my hands into the polished wooden floorboards, floors I had scrubbed by hand just yesterday, and stared at the grain of the wood. I accept your rejection, Alpha Draxon, I whispered. My voice was like dry leaves skittering over pavement. Speak up, he barked. Let the pack hear you accept your place. I raised my head. I forced myself to look at him. He was 35, in his prime, handsome in a cruel, sharp-edged way. He looked at my gray-streaked hair, the fine lines around my eyes, the softness of a body that had lived half a century, and he sneered. I accept your rejection, I said louder this time. May the moon goddess grant you what you deserve. Draxon waved his hand dismissively. She already has. She freed me from you. Now, get out of my sight. You are relieved of your duties in the library. We don't need you dusting books and pretending to be wise. You belong in the scullery. The floors in the Omega quarters have rot in the corners. Go scrub them until your fingers bleed. A gasp went through the room. The library was a sanctuary. It was the one place I had felt dignified. The scullery was a punishment detail, usually reserved for criminals or exiles. Did you hear me? Draxon challenged, leaning forward. Or has your hearing gone the way of your beauty? I stood up. My knees popped, a sound that seemed echoing loudly in this quiet hall. Sebel, the Alpha's current favorite, giggled from the front row. Careful, Alpha, she called out, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. Don't make her move too fast. She might break a hip. The laughter followed me as I turned my back on them. I walked down the long aisle, feeling 300 pairs of eyes burning into my spine. I held my head high, fixing my gaze on the heavy oak doors at the end of the hall. I would not run. I would not weep. I would walk out of here as the woman I was, even if they refused to see me. I pushed the doors open and stepped into the night. The cool air hit my flushed face, offering a small mercy. I looked up at the moon, fat and silver in the sky. 12? I whispered to the silence. 12 times you have taunted me. Is this a game to you? The moon didn't answer. It just hung there, beautiful and distant, watching as I walked toward the servants' entrance, toward the bleach and the rot, to scrub away the rest of my life. Chapter 1. The Dust of a Life. The Omega quarters were located in the basement of the pack house, a sprawling labyrinth of concrete and exposed pipes that smelled perpetually of damp wool and harsh chemicals. It was a different world from the velvet and mahogany of the upper floors. Down here there was no sunlight, only the flickering hum of fluorescent bulbs that turned everyone's skin a sickly shade of yellow. I knelt on the cold concrete, the bristled brush in my hand moving in a rhythmic circle. Scrub, rinse, scrub, rinse. My hands were red and swollen from the water. I paused for a moment, looking at them. They were strong hands. They were hands that had birthed foals in the pack stables when the vet was too drunk to show up. They were hands that had sewn wedding dresses for 3 generations of Lunas. They were hands that had held dying elders when their families were too busy fighting over inheritances to sit by the bedside. But to the pack, they were just old hands. It had been 2 weeks since Draxon's rejection. 2 weeks of silence. No one spoke to me. When I walked into the kitchen to collect the dirty trays, conversations would stop abruptly. The younger wolves would wrinkle their noses, as if failure was contagious, as if catching my age was a disease they could contract by breathing the same air. I dipped the brush back into the bucket. The water was gray and murky. "You missed a spot." I didn't flinch. I knew that voice. I recognized the cadence of entitlement before I even saw the shoes. Expensive, red-soled heels stepped into my field of vision, dangerously close to the bucket of dirty water. I looked up. Sybelle Draegor stood over me, her arms crossed over her chest. She was 19, radiant with the kind of beauty that hadn't yet been touched by grief or hardship. Her blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders in perfect waves, and her blue eyes shone with a malicious delight. "Good morning, Sybelle," I said quietly, returning to my scrubbing. "Did you need something?" "I need you to hurry up," she said, nudging my shoulder with the toe of her heel. "You're moving so slowly. It's pathetic, really. Watching you is like watching paint dry, only uglier." I tightened my grip on the brush, but kept my head down. "The mildew is deep here. It takes time." "Time is something you don't have much of, isn't it?" She laughed, a sharp or brittle sound. "I heard the elders talking. They say if you don't shift by the next full moon, they might petition to have you move to the hospice wing. Or the morgue. Save everyone the trip." I stopped scrubbing. The cruelty was unnecessary. I was already on the floor. I was already beneath her. Why did she feel the need to kick? "I am 50, Sybelle, not dead," I said, my voice steady. "Might as well be," she sneered. She leaned down, her perfume, something sickly sweet like candied violets, filling the cramped hallway. "You're a stain on this pack, Estara. A reminder of what happens when the goddess forgets about you. Do us all a favor. When you're done down here, go walk into the woods. The rogues are hungry. At least then, you'd serve a purpose." She kicked the bucket. It wasn't a hard kick, just enough to tip it. The gray soapy water sloshed out, soaking the front of my apron and pooling around my knees. "Oops," Sybelle said, her eyes wide with mock innocence. "Clumsy me. Clean that up, will you? Before the dampness sets into your bones. We wouldn't want you catching pneumonia." She turned on her heel and strutted away, the click-clack of her shoes echoing down the corridor. I sat there in the puddle of cold water. I watched the dirty liquid soak into the fabric of my dress, feeling the chill seep through to my skin. I closed my eyes. I could leave. The thought rose in my mind, seductive and terrifying. I could stand up, walk out the back door, and just keep walking. I could cross the border into the neutral lands. I would likely die within a week, a lone human woman against the elements and the feral rogues. But at least I would die on my feet. At least I would die free of this suffocating shame. But I didn't stand. I reached for the rag. I soaked up the water. I wrung it out. Because survival was a habit I couldn't seem to break. Chapter 2. The dress of red velvet. The pack was vibrating. It was a physical sensation, a low-frequency hum that seemed to rattle the window panes of the pack house. The king was coming. Fenric Draegor. The Lycan King. The ruler of all shifters. We had never had a royal visit in Silver Creek. We were a backwater pack, insignificant in the grand scheme of politics. But the king was doing a tour of the territories, and for one night, our muddy little town was the center of the universe. The preparation was frantic. The great hall was being scrubbed from ceiling to floor, ironically by everyone except me, as Draxon decided I was too unsightly to be seen by the royal guard. Instead, I was sequestered in the sewing room, buried under mounds of silk and tulle. Tighter, Sibel commanded. I knelt behind her, my mouth full of pins, cinching the waist of the red velvet gown. If I pull it any tighter, you won't be able to breathe, I mumbled around the pins. I don't need to breathe, Sibel snapped, looking at herself in the trifold mirror. I need to stun. King Fenric is 21 years old, Estara. 21. He's young, he's powerful, and he's notoriously single. When he walks through those doors, I need to be the only thing he sees. I pulled the fabric. Sibel gasped, her ribs contracting, but a satisfied smile spread across her face. She looked magnificent. I couldn't deny it. The red dress was cut scandalously low, clinging to her curves like a second skin, with a slit that went all the way up to her hip. It was a dress made for seduction, a dress made for a queen. He won't choose a mate based on a dress, I said softly, securing the pin. Sibel spun around, nearly knocking me over. What would you know about it? You've been rejected 12 times. You are the expert on what men don't want. I am 19. I am a beta by blood, soon to be an alpha by marriage, or a queen if I play my cards right. I have everything you never had. She reached out and touched my cheek. Her fingers were cold. You know, I almost feel sorry for you, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Imagine being 50 years old and having nothing. No legacy, no mate, just a lifetime of sewing dresses for women better than you. She turned back to the mirror, preening. Make sure the hem is perfect. If I trip in front of the king, I'll have you flayed. I bent my head, resuming my work. My fingers were stiff, the arthritis flaring up with the incoming storm, but my stitches were tiny and perfect. I sewed the hem of the dress that was meant to catch the king. I sewed the ambition of a girl who hated me into every seam. They say he's a monster, Sibel chatted idly, checking her teeth in the glass. They say he took the throne by tearing his challenger in half. They say his wolf is the size of a bear and his eyes burn like hellfire. I hope it's true. I like a monster. Draxon is too tame. I shivered. I had heard the rumors too. Fenric Draegor, the boy king, the slaughterer of the north. He sounded terrifying. A creature of violence and blood. Just finish it, Sibel commanded, stepping off the podium. And then go hide in the kitchen. Alpha Draxon was very clear. He doesn't want the king's appetite ruined by the sight of the help. I finished the final stitch and bit the thread. It is done, I said. Sibel didn't thank me. She grabbed the dress and stormed out, shouting for her hairstylist. I was left alone in the sewing room, surrounded by scraps of red velvet that looked like pools of blood on the floor. I walked to the window and looked out. Dark sedans, sleek and black with tinted windows, were winding their way up the long driveway. Flags bearing the crest of the golden Lycan, a wolf rampant on a field of black, fluttered from the hoods. The king was here, and I needed to hide. Chapter 3. The Scent of Winter and Roses. The kitchen was an inferno. 30 cooks were shouting orders, pans were clanging, and the heat from the industrial ovens was enough to singe eyebrows. I was stationed at the washing sinks in the far corner, hidden behind a stack of dirty roasting pans that reached the ceiling. My job was simple: keep the dishes clean so the banquet could continue. I couldn't see the great hall, but I could hear it. I heard the trumpet blast that signaled the king's entrance. I heard the hush that fell over the room, a silence so profound it felt heavy, like the air pressure dropping before a tornado touches down. I kept my head down, scrubbing a pot encrusted with burnt gravy. The water was scalding, turning my hands a raw, angry red, but I focused on the pain. Pain was grounding. Pain was real. Then, the smell hit me. It wasn't gradual. It didn't waft in like the smell of roasting meat or perfume. It collided with me. It was the scent of a deep, frozen forest in the dead of winter, crisp pine needles crushed under heavy boots, the sharp metallic tang of snow on iron, and beneath it all, something rich and heady, dark roses blooming in the dark, velvet, and intoxicating. My hand stopped moving. The pot slipped from my soapy fingers and clattered into the sink, splashing water onto my apron. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Thump, thump, thump. It was the pull, the mating pull. I gripped the edge of the metal sink, my knuckles turning white. No. Not now. Not today. Not with a guest. Please, goddess, not number 13. I cannot survive number 13. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the scent, but it was everywhere. It was filling my lungs, seeping into my pores, making the fine hairs on my arms stand straight up. It was calling to me, a primal magnetic force that demanded I move. Go to him. Find him. Need him. Estara, pick up the pace, the head cook shouted. We need those platters. I tried to reach for the pot, but my hands were trembling so violently, I couldn't grasp the handle. In the main hall, King Fenric Draegor walked the center aisle. He was a giant of a man, standing 6'6", with shoulders that blocked out the light from the chandeliers. He wore a suit of black tactical material that strained against muscles carved from granite, eschewing the formal robes Draxon had expected. Sit. His face was terrifyingly beautiful, sharp cheekbones, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes of glowing molten amber that scanned the room with the predatory indifference of a tiger looking at a herd of sheep. He ignored the banners. He ignored Alpha Draxon, who was bowing so low his nose nearly touched the floor. Sibel stepped forward. She had positioned herself perfectly in the center of the aisle, the red dress clinging to her body, her chest heaving to ensure maximum attention. Your Majesty, she purred, dropping into a curtsy that displayed everything she had to offer. Welcome to Silver Creek. I have been counting the seconds. Fenric stopped. He looked down at her. The entire pack held its breath. He inhaled, his nostrils flaring. Then, his lip curled in a sneer of absolute disgust. You smell of desperation and synthetic vanilla, he rumbled. His voice was deep, a tectonic vibration that shook the floorboards. Move. Sibel's smile froze in place, fracturing like dropped glass. Your Majesty? Fenric didn't repeat himself. He stepped around her, as if she were a puddle of mud he didn't want to soil his boots with. He continued walking, his head tilting, hunting. He stalked past the beta female, past the gamma, past the elders. He was moving faster now, his stride lengthening. He was heading straight for the service doors. Your Majesty, Draxon called out, panic rising in his voice. The banquet table is this way. That is the kitchen. It is not prepared for you. Fenric didn't slow down. He reached the double swinging doors leading to the kitchen. He didn't push them. He swiped his hand out, and with a sickening screech of tearing metal, the left door was ripped clean off its hinges. It crashed to the floor with a thunderous boom. I jumped back as the door exploded inward, shielding my face from the flying splinters. The kitchen staff screamed and scrambled back, pressing themselves against the ovens. Hey! Through the dust and the steam, a figure emerged. Estara. He was huge. He sucked all the air out of the room. His presence was heavy, crushing, undeniable. He stepped over the broken door, his amber eyes scanning the kitchen frantically, ignoring the terrified cooks. Then, he stopped. His eyes locked onto the corner. Onto me. I was a mess. My gray hair was escaping its bun in frizzy tendrils. My apron was soaked with dirty dishwater. I had sweat on my upper lip and fear in my throat. I was 50 years old, crouching behind a stack of dirty pans. Fenric's eyes changed. The amber vanished, swallowed whole by a glowing electric crimson. The color of a lichen completely consumed by the instinct. He took a step toward me, then another. He was moving with a terrifying intensity. The kitchen staff parted like the Red Sea, terrified of the predator in their midst. He stopped 2 feet in front of me. He towered over me, blocking out the harsh fluorescent lights. The scent of winter and roses was so strong I could taste it on my tongue. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't look away. He looked down at me. His chest heaved. Mate, he growled. It wasn't a question. It was an absolute fact. A decree from the gods. I shook my head, backing up until my spine hit the cold metal of the sink. No, I whispered, my voice cracking. No, child, you are mistaken. The bond is... It is confused. I am old. I am nobody. Fenric didn't listen. He dropped to his knees. The king of all wolves, the man who terrified alphas, fell to his knees on the greasy, wet kitchen floor, ruining his pants without a second thought. Eh! He reached out. His hands were massive, scarred, lethal, but they approached me with a gentleness that made my heart ache. He cupped my face, his thumbs brushing against the wrinkles at the corners of my eyes. "You're not nobody," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine. And then the spark happened. It wasn't figurative. A literal arc of blue electricity jumped from his skin to mine with a loud crack. It stung, it burned, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever felt. It was the feeling of a key finally turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for 50 years. "Mine," he breathed against my skin. "My queen." Chapter 4. The Silent Room. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Even the boiling pots seemed to hush. Then the spell broke. "King Fenric?" Alpha Draxon stormed through the opening where the door used to be, his face purple with exertion and rage. Sibel was right behind him, her red dress trailing through the sawdust and debris, her face a mask of twisted confusion. "King Fenric, get up!" Draxon shouted, forgetting himself in his panic. That is Estara. She is the kitchen help. She is the Omega." Fenric didn't move. He didn't take his hands from my face. He didn't break his gaze from mine. He was drinking me in, memorizing the map of my face. "She is my mate," Fenric said. His voice was quiet, but it carried a violence that made the windows rattle in their frames. "That is impossible!" Sibel shrieked. Her voice was high and shrill, shattering the atmosphere. "Look at her! She's ancient. She's 50 years old. She's older than your mother. She has no wolf. She's a dried-up barren hag." Fenric went still. The thumb stroking my cheek stopped. Slowly, painfully slowly, he pulled back from me. He stood up, unfolding his massive height until he loomed over the room, like a dark tower. He turned to face them. "What did you say?" he asked softly. Sibel faltered. She took a step back, realizing too late that she had just insulted a predator, but her jealousy was a poison that made her stupid. "I said she's old," she spat, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You are the king. You need a queen, not a geriatric charity case. Look at her wrinkles, your majesty. It's disgusting." Draxon stepped in front of her, trying to salvage the diplomatic disaster. "Your majesty, please. The girl speaks out of turn, but surely there is a mistake. The bond can glitch. Estara is past her prime. She cannot give you heirs. She cannot run with you. I can call the Council of Elders right now. We can sever the bond before it sets. You can choose a proper mate. Sibel is of high bloodlines." Fenric laughed. It was a dark, jagged sound. It sounded like bones breaking. "Break the bond?" Fenric repeated. He took a step toward Draxon. Draxon shrank back, his wolf whining in submission. "You look at her and you see age," Fenric said, his voice rising, vibrating with fury. "You see wrinkles. You see a servant." He pointed at Draxon's chest. "I look at her and I see survival. I see a woman who has lived 50 years in a pack of vipers and kept her soul intact. Do you think the moon goddess makes mistakes, Draxon?" He turned his burning red eyes on Sibel. "You speak of beauty? You are a child playing dress-up in your mother's clothes. You are hollow. You are vain. You have never known a day of hardship in your life." Oh. He gestured to me without looking away from her. "This woman has wisdom etched into her skin. She has fire in her blood that has been banked for decades. I have waited 21 years for my mate. I did not wait for a child. I waited for a queen." He turned back to Draxon. "You called her expired goods." Draxon swallowed hard. I was merely stating facts, your majesty." "Here is a fact," Fenric snarled. "If you speak one more word against her, if you even look at her with disrespect, I will rip your throat out right here on this floor. Do you understand?" Draxon fell to his knees, baring his neck. Yes, your majesty. Mercy." Fenric turned back to me. The red faded from his eyes, replaced by that warm amber. He held out his hand. It was steady. "Estara," he said. Come with me. I looked at his hand. I looked at the onlookers. I am dirty, I whispered, looking down at my stained apron. I smell of dishwater. You smell like home, Fenric said. He didn't wait. He stepped forward and scooped me up into his arms as if I weighed nothing more than a breath of air. I gasped, instinctively wrapping my arms around his thick neck. He felt like solid rock. He felt safe. He carried me out of the kitchen. Stepping over the prostrate form of Alpha Draxon, he carried me through the great hall, past the stunned silence of the pack, past the weeping Sibyl. He didn't look left or right. He only looked at me. Chapter 5. The Mirror. He didn't stop walking until we reached the VIP guest house on the edge of the territory. It was a separate building, reserved for royalty. He kicked the door open and carried me up the stairs to the master suite. He set me down gently on the edge of the massive four-poster bed. The room was dim, lit only by the fire crackling in the hearth. I felt small. I felt exposed. I stood up quickly, backing away from him until I hit the wall. You are in shock, I said, my hands trembling. This is just the adrenaline. When it fades, you will see. Fenric was unbuttoning his tactical jacket. He tossed it onto a chair, revealing a black t-shirt that clung to his chest. He stopped and looked at me, his head tilted to the side. See what, Estara? See me? I cried out. I spun around and pointed to the full-length mirror in the corner. Look! I walked to the glass. I forced myself to look. I am 50. Look at my neck. Look at the silver in my hair. I am not a Luna. I am a spinster who scrubs floors. I pointed at his reflection behind me. He was vibrant, youthful, terrifyingly perfect. You are a child. You are 21. I could be your mother. The world will laugh at you. The other alphas will mock you. They will say the king has taken a crone for a maid. Tears finally spilled over. The tears I had refused to shed for Draxon came pouring out now. I cannot do this to you. I cannot be the reason the king is a joke. Fenric didn't speak. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He stood behind me in the mirror. He reached out and untied the knot of my apron. It fell to the floor with a heavy thud. Then he reached up and pulled the pins from my hair. My heavy, gray-streaked waves cascaded down my back. He buried his face in the curve of my neck, inhaling deeply. Let them laugh, he murmured against my skin, his lips brushing the pulse point that was fluttering like a trapped bird. And then watch me kill them all. Be serious, Fenric, I sobbed. I am old. He spun me around. He gripped my shoulders, his fingers digging in possessively. You think your age makes you weak? He asked, his gaze intense. Estara, look at me. I looked up. I have met the young she-wolves. I have met the debutantes like Sibyl. They are flighty. They are exhausting. They care about status and jewels. They know nothing of loyalty. They know nothing of pain. He traced the line of my jaw with a calloused thumb. But you have survived 50 years of rejection, and you are still standing. You are still kind. I saw you. I saw how you held your head high. You have a strength they can't even dream of. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. The moon goddess made me wait. She kept me alone for 21 years because she knew I wasn't ready for a woman like you yet. I don't need a child, Estara. I need a queen. I need an equal. My knees went weak. The conviction in his voice was a physical weight. But my body, I whispered, shame burning my cheeks. It is not tight. It is not young. Fenric groaned, a low, guttural sound of hunger. He pulled my hips flush against his. I could feel the heat radiating off him, the hard ridge of his desire pressing against my stomach. Your body is a masterpiece, he growled. Every line is a story. And tonight, I am going to read every single one of them. I am going to worship you until you forget every man who was too blind to see you. He captured my lips. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was a siege. It was demanding, hot, and overwhelming. He kissed me like a man starving. He kissed me like I was the only water in a desert. And for the first time in 50 years, the cold inside my bones began to melt. I wasn't the Omega. I wasn't the reject. I was the queen, and my king had finally come home. Chapter 6. The Banquet of Envy. I walked into the great hall, and for the first time in 50 years, I did not look at the floor. Fenric walked beside me, his large hand resting possessively on the small of my back. His touch was a brand, a constant stream of heat that kept the cold whispers of the pack at bay. He had refused to let me wear my old clothes. Instead, I wore a gown of deep, midnight blue silk that he had pulled from the royal luggage, originally intended for his mother, the Dowager Queen. But it fit my curves in a way that made Fenric's eyes darken every time he looked at me. Shaitan. The hall was silent. 300 wolves, who had spent decades looking through me, were now forced to look at me. We took our seats at the high table. Usually, I would be in the back, clearing plates. Tonight, I sat at the right hand of the king. I could feel the waves of hostility rolling off the pack members. They were confused. They were disgusted. They were waiting for the joke to end. Eat, Fenric murmured, placing a slice of rare roast beef on my plate. You are too thin, Estara. A queen needs strength. I reached for my wine glass, my fingers trembling slightly. Not from age, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of the attention. Careful, a voice chimed out. We wouldn't want to spill. Sybelle Draegor appeared at my elbow. She held a carafe of red wine. She had changed out of the red dress into something black and mournful, playing the victim, but her eyes were hard as flint. Allow me to pour for you, Luna, she said, the title dripping with sarcasm. Before I could pull my glass away, Sybelle tipped the carafe. She didn't aim for the glass. A stream of dark crimson wine splashed heavily onto my lap, soaking into the midnight blue silk, spreading like a fresh wound. The hall gasped. Oh dear, Sybelle said, her voice loud and theatrically apologetic. She covered her mouth with a manicured hand. I am so clumsy. But then again, Estara, your hands were shaking so badly. I suppose at your age, motor control is the first thing to go. Perhaps we should get you a bib or a sippy cup? Laughter rippled through the room. It was the same laughter I had heard earlier that day. The laughter that said, you are old, you are broken, you are a joke. Fenric moved. The table shuddered as he started to rise, a low growl vibrating in his chest that promised murder. No, I said. I didn't shout. I didn't whisper. I spoke with a voice I didn't know I possessed. Fenric stopped, looking down at me. I stood up. The wine dripped from my dress onto the floor. I didn't wipe it. I turned slowly to face Sybelle. She was 19. She was beautiful. She was cruel. And she was smiling, thinking she had won, thinking she had put the servant back in her place. I looked at her and I realized something. She wasn't powerful. She was just a child with a sharp tongue. And I had survived 50 winters. I had survived the death of parents, the rejection of lovers, and the crushing weight of loneliness. You think my age makes me weak, I said, my voice carrying to the back of the room. You think because I have gray in my hair, I am soft. Sybelle smirked. I think you're a mess, Estara. Look at you, ruining the king's dinner. I didn't hesitate. I didn't telegraph the movement. I brought my hand up and slapped her. It wasn't a polite slap. It was the heavy, solid strike of a woman who had scrubbed floors and chopped wood for 30 years. My palm connected with her cheek with a crack that sounded like a pistol shot echoing through the hall. Sybelle's head snapped to the side. She stumbled back, clutching her face, her eyes wide with shock. The hall went deathly silent. I may be old, I said, stepping into her space, forcing her to back down. But that means I have had 50 years to learn exactly how to deal with spoiled children. You will never disrespect me again, Sybelle, not because I am the king's mate, but because I am Estara Nightveil, and I am done bowing to you. Ari. I turned to Fenric. He wasn't angry. He was leaning back in his chair, a dark, dangerous smile playing on his lips. His eyes were glowing with absolute pride. So, that, Fenric rumbled, addressing the silent room, is a Luna Queen. Chapter 7. The Rejection of the Rejectors. The next morning, the atmosphere in the Silver Creek territory had shifted. The mockery was gone, replaced by a terrifying tension. The king hadn't left. He had set up court in our humble pack house, and the news had spread like wildfire across the region. The Lycan King had found his mate, and she was an unshifted 50-year-old Omega. It drew them in like vultures to a carcass. I stood on the porch of the pack house, Fenric by my side. 3 black SUVs tore up the gravel driveway, screeching to a halt. Doors opened, and 3 men stepped out. I knew them, my stomach twisted into a cold knot. Alpha Malik Thornvale, Alpha Silas Morvain, Alpha Cade Fenlin. Shit! 3 men from neighboring packs. 3 men who, years ago, had felt the pull of the mate bond with me, looked at my face, and walked away. Malik had rejected me when I was 30. He said I was too plain. Silas had rejected me at 35. He said he couldn't have a mate without a wolf. Cade had rejected me at 42. He had simply laughed. Now they stood before the king, bowing low, but their eyes were on me, greedy, calculating. Your Majesty, Alpha Malik began, smoothing his expensive suit. We came as soon as we heard. There has been a misunderstanding regarding the female. Fenric didn't move. He stood with his arms crossed, looking like a statue carved from war and violence. Speak. This female, Malik said, pointing a finger at me. Estara. We have a history. The mating bond. It pulled me to her 20 years ago. Technically, by the old laws, she is my fated mate. I have a prior claim. And I? Silas chimed in, stepping forward. The bond pulled me to her 15 years ago. If we are speaking of rights, she belongs to the Northern Territories. I felt sick. They didn't want me. They wanted the connection to the throne. If they could claim prior rights, they could try to force Fenric to negotiate, perhaps extracting land or money to release me. Or worse, they thought they could take me back and use me as a bargaining chip. You rejected her, Fenric said. His voice was dangerously calm. I was young, Malik shrugged. I was foolish. But a bond is a bond, Your Majesty. You cannot steal another alpha's mate simply because you are king. It sets a bad precedent. Fenric slowly uncrossed his arms. He took a step down the porch stairs. The gravel crunched under his boots. You want to talk about old laws? Fenric asked softly. We only want what is fair, Cade added, smirking at me. Come now, Estara. You remember me, don't you? We had a spark. Why settle for a boy king when you can be with a man your own age? That was the mistake. Fenric moved. He was a blur of motion, too fast for the human eye to track. 1 second he was on the stairs. The next, he had Cade by the throat, lifting the grown man off the ground with one hand. Cade choked, clawing uselessly at Fenric's iron grip. She is not a piece of property to be bartered over. Fenric snarled, his voice dropping into the distorted, dual tone of a Lycan on the verge of shifting. You rejected her. You broke the bond. You left her to rot for decades. You looked at a treasure and saw trash. He threw Cade. He didn't just shove him, he launched him. Cade flew 10 feet and crashed into the side of the SUV, denting the metal door. Malik and Silas shifted instantly, their wolves bursting forth in a shower of fur and cloth. 2 large gray wolves, snarling and snapping. They thought they could take him. 2 alphas against 1 young king. Fenric didn't even shift. He caught Malik's wolf midair as it lunged. He grabbed the wolf by the scruff of its neck and slammed it into the gravel with enough force to crack the earth. Malik whimpered, pinned under the king's boot. Silas hesitated, seeing his allies decimated in seconds. Fenric looked at him. His eyes were bleeding crimson. Submit, Fenric commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an alpha voice so powerful it forced me to my knees on the porch. Silas's wolf whined, belly crawling on the ground, exposing his throat. Fenric stood over them, a god of vengeance. You want a claim? He roared. Here is my claim. She is mine. If you ever look at her, speak to her, or breathe the same air as her again, I will not just kill you. I will erase your bloodlines. I will burn your pack lands to ash and salt the earth so nothing ever grows there again. He looked up at me on the porch. His expression softened instantly. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice rough. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. For 50 years, men had looked at me and seen a problem to be solved or discarded. Today, a king had looked at them and seen enemies to be destroyed for my sake. Get them out of here, Fenric ordered the royal guards who had just materialized, and strip them of their titles. No man who abandons a mate is fit to lead. Chapter 8. The Biological Clock. The victory over the alphas felt sweet, but reality has a way of souring even the best wine. That evening, an emergency council meeting was called in the Pack Library. The room smelled of old paper and leather, a scent I used to love when I worked here, but now it felt like a courtroom. Fenric sat at the head of the table, with me at his right. Opposite us sat the elders of Silver Creek, led by Heron Volstar. Heron was not a cruel man like Draxon. He was old, pragmatic, and obsessed with the survival of the species, which made him far more dangerous. Your Majesty, Heron began, keeping his tone respectful, we do not dispute the bond. We saw what you did to Alpha Malik today. Your devotion to Estara is commendable. But, Fenric pressed, drumming his fingers on the table. But we must speak of the lineage, Heron said, looking directly at me. His eyes weren't hateful, just pitying. You are the last of the Draegor bloodline, sire. The Lycan throne requires an heir, a strong heir. He paused, sliding a folder across the table. Estara is 50 years old. Even if she were a shifted wolf, pregnancy at that age carries severe risks. But she is human, biologically speaking. Her time has passed. She cannot give you a pup, Your Majesty, and a king without an heir is a kingdom waiting for civil war. The room went quiet. I looked down at my hands, the hands Sibel had mocked. Heron was right. I felt a cold stone settle in my stomach. Love was powerful, but biology was absolute. I was menopausal. I hadn't had a cycle in 6 months. I was a barren field. I do not care, Fenric said, pushing the folder away without opening it. I will appoint a nephew. I will change the laws. I will not choose another. You cannot change biology, Heron insisted gently. However, there is a compromise. The old laws allow for a surrogate arrangement, a second mate purely for breeding purposes. She would have no status. She would simply carry the heir that Estara cannot. Heron gestured to the door. Sibel Draycross has high fertility markers. She's young. She's strong. She has volunteered for the duty. My heart stopped. Sibel, carrying Fenric's child. I looked at Fenric. He had gone rigid. I could see the muscle in his jaw jumping. Get out, Fenric whispered. Sire, please be reasonable. I said get out, Fenric roared, standing up and flipping the heavy oak table. Wood splintered. Papers flew everywhere. You suggest I lay with that viper? You suggest I dishonor my mate to satisfy your politics? I suggest you save your kingdom, Heron shouted back, standing his ground. Do you love her enough to let your dynasty die with you? Because that is the choice, Fenric. You can have her, or you can have an heir. You cannot have both. Fenric looked at me. His eyes were wild, tortured. He wanted to scream that it didn't matter, but I saw the shadow in his gaze. He was a king. He loved his people. The thought of his line ending, it hurt him. I stood up. The room was spinning. The walls felt like they were closing in. I need air, I gasped. Estara, Fenric reached for me. No, I backed away. He's right, Fenric. He's right. I am old. I am dry wood. I cannot give you what you need. Estara, stop! I turned and ran. I ran out of the library, down the hall, pushing past the confused guards. I needed to get out. I needed to breathe. The shame was hotter than it had been at the rejection. This wasn't about beauty. This was about worth. I was a dead end for him. Chapter 9. The Ancient Wolf. I burst out the back doors of the pack house and ran toward the forest line. The night air was cold, biting at my skin, but I was burning up. A terrible heat was building in my chest. It wasn't the heat of exertion. It was a grinding, crushing pressure, like my ribs were being put in a vice. I stumbled, falling to my knees in the wet grass. Goddess, I gasped, clutching my chest. Please, Just let me die. Don't let me be a burden to him. The pain spiked. It felt like lightning striking my spine. I screamed, a sound that tore through the night. Estara? I heard Fenric's voice, panic-stricken, getting closer. I curled into a ball. My bones were snapping. I could hear them. Crack. Snap. My femur. My shoulder blades. It felt like my body was being put through a wood chipper. Fenric! I screamed. Help me! It hurts! He was there instantly, sliding on the grass, pulling me into his lap. I'm here, baby, I'm here. Healer, get the healer! He roared back at the house. Her heart! He sobbed, pressing his hand to my chest. Her heart is beating too fast. She's having a heart attack. Stay with me, Estara. You can't leave me? It's breaking? I choked out. And then the world turned white. My back arched off the ground. The sound of tearing flesh filled the air. It wasn't death. It was birth. A power I had never known exploded from within my marrow. For 50 years, it had been sleeping. For 50 years, it had been growing, condensing, becoming dense and heavy like a diamond under pressure. Most wolves shift at 16. Their wolves are puppies, eager and light. My wolf was not a puppy. She was an ancient. She was a creature from a time before records began. And she was finally waking up. Get back! Fenric shouted, realizing too late what was happening. I exploded. Clothes shredded, skin reshaped, fur burst forth like silver needles. The pain vanished, replaced by a surge of power so intoxicating I wanted to howl at the moon and bring the stars down. I stood up. I shook my massive head, shaking off the remnants of the shift. I looked down. Fenric was standing there. He is a large man, over 6.5 feet. But I was looking down at him. My paws were the size of dinner plates. My fur was a shimmering metallic silver that seemed to glow in the moonlight. My shoulder came up to Fenric's head. I wasn't just a wolf. I was a dire wolf, a legend. Fenric stared up at me, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with awe. Goddess above, he whispered. You aren't wolfless. You were just cooking. Chapter 10, The Heat. I chuffed, a sound like a boulder rolling down a hill. The sensation of the cool night air on my fur was ecstasy. I felt strong. I felt lethal. I nudged Fenric's chest with my massive snout, nearly knocking him over. He laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. He buried his hands in the thick ruff of fur around my neck. Beautiful, he said. You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. But then, the scent changed. With the shift came the hormones. 50 years of suppressed biological cycles slammed into my system all at once. The air suddenly smelled thick, sweet, and heavy. My scent, winter and roses, intensified until it was a cloud surrounding us. Fenric froze. His pupils blew wide, swallowing the amber iris until his eyes were black pits of desire. He inhaled sharply, his whole body shuddering. Estara, he groaned, his voice dropping an octave. You're in heat. I whined, the sound low and needy. My body was burning again, but not with pain, with a hunger that threatened to consume me. I needed him. I needed his mark. I needed to complete the bond. Heron was wrong, Fenric growled, stripping off his t-shirt as his own skin began to ripple, his Lycan fighting to get out. You aren't barren. The shift unlocked it all. You are fertile. I can smell it. He didn't wait. He didn't care that we were on the lawn. He didn't care that the pack was watching from the windows. Shift back, he commanded, his voice rough with restraint. Shift back, Estara. I need to take you to the den. Now. I focused. It was easier than I thought. The silver fur receded, and I was human again, naked, shivering, and flushed with the heat of the cycle. Fenric scooped me up before my feet could touch the cold grass. He ran. He didn't walk. He sprinted back toward the VIP guest house, kicking the door shut behind us and locking it. He carried me to the bed, laying me down as if I were made of glass, but looking at me as if he wanted to devour me whole. You waited 50 years for this, he whispered, hovering over me, his skin fever hot against mine. I am going to make sure it was worth every second. He kissed me, and the world narrowed down to just the two of us. There was no age, there was no rank, there was only the alpha and his mate. And as he claimed me body and soul, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was the start of a legacy. Chapter 11. The Kidnap. The week following the mating ceremony was a blur of gold and heat. For 7 days, we didn't leave the VIP suite. For 7 days, I wasn't Estara the Omega. I was Estara the Beloved. Fenric made me forget every cold night, every harsh word, every moment of loneliness I had endured for half a century. He worshipped my body with a reverence that made me weep, tracing the silver stretch marks on my hips as if they were maps to a treasure he had spent his life hunting. But reality has a way of breaking down even the strongest doors. On the 8th morning, the council demanded the king's presence. There were treaties to sign, damage control to manage after he had humiliated 3 visiting alphas, and the logistics of moving me to the Lycan capital. I will only be an hour, Fenric promised, kissing the pulse point behind my ear. He smelled of sandalwood and satisfaction. Stay inside. The guards are at the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. I am 50, Fenric, not 5, I teased, smoothing the collar of his shirt. I can entertain myself. He growled low in his throat, a possessive sound that vibrated through my chest. I know. But you are my heart, Estara. If anything happened to you, the world would burn. He left, and the room felt instantly colder. I decided to go to the private garden attached to the guest house. It was enclosed by a high stone wall, guarded by 2 royal sentinels. I needed fresh air. I needed to feel the sun on my face and convince myself this wasn't all a fever dream. I sat on a stone bench, closing my eyes, listening to the bees humming in the lavender. I felt peace. True, deep peace. Then I heard a thud. It was a heavy, wet sound, like a sack of flour hitting the earth. Then another thud. I opened my eyes. The 2 royal sentinels were on the ground. Arrows protruded from their necks. Black-fletched arrows. Rogue arrows. They were laced with wolfsbane. My blood ran cold. I stood up, my instincts screaming at me to run, to shift. But before I could summon my ancient wolf, a shadow detached itself from the ivy-covered wall. Hello, Grandma. I spun around. Sibel stood there. She looked deranged. Her blonde hair was matted, her designer clothes torn and dirty. She held a damp cloth in her hand. Behind her, Alpha Draxon climbed over the wall, looking pale and sweaty. He held a crossbow. Sibel, I said, keeping my voice steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs. You are banished. If Fenric finds you here, he will peel the skin from your bones. He won't find us, Sibel hissed, stepping closer. Her eyes were manic. We're taking you to the Badlands. By the time he realizes you're gone, we'll be across the border. And once we hand you over to the Rogue King, well, let's just say Fenric will be willing to trade anything to get you back, even his crown. You are a fool, I said, backing away. He is a Lycan. You cannot outrun him. Watch me, Draxon snarled. He aimed the crossbow at my chest. Get in the van, Estara, or I put a bolt through your heart right now. I'd prefer to sell you alive, but dead works too. I calculated the distance. I could try to shift, but the wolfsbane on that arrow would kill my wolf before she fully materialized. I was trapped. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sibel laughed, lunging forward. She slapped the cloth over my nose and mouth. The chemical stench of chloroform filled my lungs. I struggled, clawing at her arms, but Draxon grabbed my wrists. The world began to spin. The garden dissolved into a swirl of green and gray. The last thing I heard was Sibel's voice dripping with venom. Finally, the trash is being taken out. Then, darkness. Chapter 12. The Queen's Strength. I woke to the smell of mold and stale urine. My head pounded like a drum, and my mouth tasted like copper. I was lying on a dirt floor, my hands bound behind my back with silver-infused rope, the kind that burns shifters and prevents the change. I blinked, forcing my eyes to focus. I was in an abandoned cabin. Sunlight streamed through cracks in the rotting wooden walls. Sybil was sitting on a crate, sharpening a knife. Draxon was pacing by the door, looking out the window every 3 seconds. "He's coming," Draxon muttered. "I can feel it. The air, it feels heavy. We should keep moving." "Stop whining," Sybil snapped. "The Rogue King is meeting us here at sunset. We get the payment, we hand over the hag, and we vanish to the human cities. We'll be rich, Draxon." I shifted my position, groaning as the silver burned my wrists. Sybil looked over, a cruel smile spreading across her face. Is the old lady awake? Does your back hurt, Estara? I hear bones get brittle after menopause." I took a deep breath. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I had spent 50 years listening. I had spent 50 years watching people like Sybil and Draxon. They were bullies, and bullies were always deep down, terrified cowards. "You won't make it to sunset," I said. My voice was raspy, but calm. Sybil laughed, walking over and kicking my thigh. "Shut up. Draxon knows it," I continued, ignoring her. I locked eyes with the former alpha. "Look at him, Sybil. He's sweating. He knows what Fenric is. Fenric isn't just a wolf. He is a force of nature. He is tracking my scent right now. And when he finds you—" "He won't find us," Sybil screamed, bringing the knife down to my throat. The cold steel pressed against my skin. "He will," I whispered. "And he will start with your fingers, one by one." Sybil's hand trembled. "But," I said, letting the word hang in the air, "there is a way out." Draxon stopped pacing. He looked at me. "What are you talking about?" "Fenric only wants me," I lied smoothly. "If you leave now, if you leave me here tied up, I will tell him I escaped. I will tell him I knocked you unconscious and ran. I will buy you time." "Why would you do that?" Draxon narrowed his eyes. "Because I am tired, Draxon," I said, injecting a note of exhaustion into my voice. "I don't want more blood. I just want to go home. If he catches you here, he will tear you apart slowly. If you run now, you might live." Draxon looked at the door. Then he looked at Sybil. "She's right," Draxon said. "The Rogue King is late. If Fenric gets here first—" "You coward!" Sybil shrieked. "She's tricking you. She's trying to—" "I'm not dying for your revenge, Sybil," Draxon yelled back. The fear had taken hold. My words had planted the seed, and his own cowardice was watering it. While they argued, I moved my fingers. I wasn't just relying on psychology. I was relying on the fact that Sybil was a city girl who didn't know wood rot from oak. I was tied to a support beam, but the wood behind my back was soft, eaten away by termites. I had been picking at it with my fingernails since I woke up. Sybil turned on Draxon, raising the knife. "If you leave, I'll kill her right now. Then you have no bargaining chip." "No," Draxon lunged for her. They grappled. It was pathetic. Two traitors turning on each other at the first sign of pressure. I took the moment. I threw my entire weight forward. The rotted beam snapped. I fell forward, the wood splintering, freeing the ropes from the anchor point. My hands were still bound, but I was no longer attached to the wall. I rolled onto my back and kicked. I aimed for Sybil's knee. I put 50 years of scrubbing floors, 50 years of hauling firewood, 50 years of hidden strength into that kick. Crack. Sybil screamed, dropping the knife as her knee buckled backward. Draxon spun around, shocked. "I told you," I panted, struggling to my knees. "I am not a damsel." Chapter 13. The King's Retribution. Draxon roared, shifting into his wolf form. A muddy brown beast. He lunged at me, jaws snapping. I couldn't shift. The silver rope was still burning my skin, blocking my wolf. I raised my bound hands to protect my throat, bracing for the bite. The bite never came. The wall of the cabin didn't just break, it disintegrated. A massive black blur slammed into Draxon midair. It was a wolf the size of a horse. A wolf made of shadows and nightmares. Fenric. He hit Draxon with the force of a freight train. There was a sickening crunch of bone, and Draxon was thrown through the opposite wall, tumbling out into the dirt. Fenric didn't follow him immediately. He turned to me. His massive head lowered, his red eyes scanning me for injuries. He whined, a high, desperate sound that broke my heart. He nudged my shoulder with his wet nose. "I'm okay," I whispered, leaning my forehead against his snout. "I'm okay." He licked the blood from my wrists where the rope had cut in. Then, he looked at Sibel. Sibel was crawling toward the door, dragging her broken legs, sobbing. Fenric snarled. The sound shook the dust from the ceiling rafters. He shifted. Bones cracked and reformed until Fenric stood there in his human form. Naked, magnificent, and covered in the dust of the destroyed wall. His eyes were still glowing crimson. He walked over to Sibel. She froze, looking up at him like a rabbit staring at a viper. "Please," she whimpered. "Please, Fenric, I loved you. I did it for love." Fenric didn't speak. He reached down and grabbed her by the hair. He dragged her out of the cabin, throwing her into the dirt next to the groaning Draxen. "You call this love?" Fenric asked, his voice eerily calm. "Kidnapping my mate, poisoning her guards, binding her with silver?" He looked at Draxen. "And you, an alpha. You betrayed your pack. You betrayed your blood." The royal guard arrived then, emerging from the trees, surrounding the clearing. But they stayed back. They knew this was the king's kill. "Kill me," Draxen wheezed, clutching his shattered ribs. "Just get it over with." "Death is too easy," Fenric said coldly. "You wanted to make her a rogue? You wanted to sell her like cattle?" He turned to the guards. "Strip him," Fenric commanded. "Burn his clothes. Burn his mark." He looked down at Draxen. "I strip you of your rank. I strip you of your name. You are no longer Draxen Hollows. You are nothing. You are exiled to the wastes. If you ever step foot in civilized territory again, you will be hunted for sport." Draxen screamed as the magic of the Alpha Command took hold, ripping the pack bond from his soul. It was a pain worse than death. Then Fenric turned to Sibel. "And you," he said softly. "You wanted to be queen. You wanted attention." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You will live. But you will live knowing that you had a place in my pack, and you threw it away for jealousy. You are banished. You will wander the woods alone. No pack will take you. No mate will claim you. You will wither in the dark, Sibel, just like you wanted Estara to." He let her go. She collapsed, weeping into the dirt. Fenric turned his back on them. He walked to me. He pulled a knife from a guard's belt and gently cut the ropes from my wrists. He kissed the raw red skin. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I left you." "You came back," I said, cupping his face. "You always come back." He picked me up in his arms. "Let's go home," he said. "I'm never letting you out of my sight again." Chapter 14. The Public Claiming. 3 days later, we stood on the balcony of the Lycan Palace. The palace was a city of gold and white stone, nestled in the peaks of the high mountains. Below us, thousands of wolves had gathered, not just Lycans, but representatives from every pack in the continent. They had come to see the new king and his controversial mate. I was terrified. I stood behind the velvet curtains, wringing my hands. I was wearing a gown of silver silk that matched my hair, encrusted with diamonds. A heavy cape of white fur hung from my shoulders. I looked like a queen, but I felt like the Omega who scrubbed pots. "I can't go out there," I whispered. "Fenric, look at them. They are expecting a goddess. They are expecting someone young and beautiful." Fenric stepped up behind me. He wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "They are expecting a queen," he corrected. "And that is exactly what they will get." He turned me around. He picked up the crown from the velvet cushion nearby. It was a circlet of platinum, woven to look like thorny vines and roses. "Estara Nightveil," he said solemnly, "you are the strongest person I have ever known. You carry the blood of the ancients. You carry my heart. Do not bow to them. Make them bow to you." He placed the crown on my head. It felt heavy, grounding. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," I lied. He took my hand and led me through the curtains. The sunlight hit me first, blindingly bright. Then the roar of the crowd. Thousands of faces looked up. Silence fell over the square, like a wave. They stared. They stared at my gray hair, shining like silver in the sun. They stared at the lines on my face. They stared at the king, who looked at me with undisguised adoration. Fenric raised his hand. "Wolves of the Dominion," his voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the mountains. "Presenting your queen, Estara of the ancient blood." There was a pause, a hesitation. Then, in the front row, an older woman, a beta, judging by her scent, slowly dropped to one knee. She had gray hair, just like me. Tears were streaming down her face. Then another woman knelt. This one was an Omega, her hands rough from work. Then another. And another. It wasn't the young warriors who knelt first. It was the forgotten ones. The older she-wolves. The ones who had been told they were past their prime. The ones who had been made to feel invisible. They looked up at me, and they didn't see a grandmother. They saw hope. They saw vindication. They saw that beauty didn't end at 25. Slowly, the rest of the crowd followed. The alphas, the warriors, the young ones. They all bowed. But my eyes were locked on those older women. I smiled at them. I raised a hand in greeting. And the roar that went up was deafening. "Long live the queen!" they chanted. "Long live the queen!" Fenric pulled me close, kissing me in front of the entire kingdom. "I told you," he whispered against my lips. "You were born for this." Later that night, Fenric made a decree. The rejection law was abolished. No mate could be rejected based on age, rank, or wolf status. Any alpha found doing so would answer to the king. I signed the document myself, my signature next to his. Estara Nightveil, the Omega who changed the world. Chapter 15. The Miracle. Epilogue. The morning sickness was getting worse. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, clutching a cold towel to my forehead. I felt dizzy, nauseous, and strangely full. "Estara?" Fenric knocked on the door. "Are you all right? You've been in there for an hour." "I'm fine," I called out, though my voice shook. "Just something I ate." But deep down, I knew it wasn't the food. I looked at the mirror. My skin was glowing. My scent had changed again. It was sweeter, milkier. But fear gripped me. I was 50. Sure, the shift had restarted my cycle, but could I really carry a child? Was it safe? Or was this something else? A sickness? A tumor? I opened the door. Fenric was pacing the hallway. He stopped when he saw me, his eyes narrowing. "You smell different," he said instantly. "Fenric, I took a deep breath. "I think we need to see the healer." I lay on the examination table. The royal healer, an ancient woman with eyes like white clouds, ran a glowing crystal over my stomach. Fenric stood by my head, holding my hand so tight his knuckles were white. He looked terrified. "Is she sick?" Fenric demanded. "Is it the shift? Did it put too much strain on her heart?" The healer didn't answer. She frowned, moving the crystal back and forth. The light inside the crystal was pulsing rapidly. Thump, 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 thump. "What is that?" I whispered. The healer looked up. Her face was pale. "It's a heartbeat, Your Majesty." Fenric let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He fell to his knees beside the table, pressing his face into my neck. "A pup. Estara. A pup." I cried. Tears of pure relief and joy. We had done it. Against all odds. Against biology. Against the world. "Wait," the healer said sharply. Fenric's head snapped up. "What, is something wrong?" The healer moved the crystal again. Thump, thump. Then a second distinct rhythm, faster, overlapping the first. Thump, thump, thump. That's 2 heartbeats," the healer stammered. "Twins?" "Twins," Fenric laughed, kissing my hand. "Double the trouble. We can handle twins." "Wait," the healer said again. Her voice was trembling now. She pressed the crystal harder. The light turned a blinding, violent purple. The room began to vibrate. The medical instruments on the tray started to rattle. "What is happening?" I grabbed Fenric's arm. "Why is the room shaking?" The healer stepped back, dropping the crystal. It shattered on the floor. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Your Majesty," the healer whispered. "It's not just twins." Fenric stood up, his alpha instincts flaring, stepping between me and the healer. Speak plainly. What is wrong with my children? Nothing is wrong, the healer gasped, backing away toward the door. But, Your Majesty, look at the monitor. We looked at the ultrasound screen. There were two small shapes, but they weren't just floating there. They were moving, violently. And then, right before our eyes, the image on the screen blurred and changed. The tiny human shape elongated. A tail appeared. A snout formed. My hands flew to my mouth. Fenric went rigid. Fenric's voice failed him. Did that fetus just shift? The healer nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. It is unheard of. Pups don't shift until puberty. The ancient blood, it is too strong. They are shifting in the womb. Suddenly, the third heartbeat joined the cacophony. Loud, like a war drum. Boom, boom! The healer looked at us, terror etched into every line of her face. And sire, that third heartbeat? That's not a wolf. Fenric looked at the screen. The third shape was different. It had wings. What have we created? I whispered.